The stranger I let in became terrifying and some mysteries were uncovered. Please click the subscribe button. I still remember the first time I saw him, standing on the edge of my driveway, rain dripping from the hood of his jacket, holding nothing but a torn backpack and a map that looked older than both of us. It was one of those gray afternoons that feels like it's waiting for something terrible to happen. I had been pruning the roses along the fence when he appeared. Quiet, hesitant, as though the air itself had pushed him there. "Ma'am," he said softly. "I'm sorry to bother you. My car broke down up the road. Could I borrow your phone?" I should have said no. But kindness is a habit you can't easily unlearn, even when the world has already punished you for it once. It had been 2 years since Harold died. 2 quiet, hollow years in which the house felt like an echo chamber of everything we never said to each other. The neighbors had stopped dropping by. The book club disbanded. Even my sister's calls had dwindled into polite text messages. So when that young man, later I'd learn his name was Evan, stood there rain-soaked and trembling, something in me responded before my brain did. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in before you catch your death." He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air in the house shifted. He looked about 25, maybe 26. Mud on his jeans, a faint scrape across his left cheek, and eyes that didn't seem to belong to someone his age. Too heavy, too tired. I handed him the cordless phone, and he dialed a number quickly. "It's not going through," he murmured. "Bad reception out here," I said. "Landline works best in the kitchen." He followed me in. He was polite, too polite. His movements measured like he was afraid of taking up too much space. When he finally reached someone, his voice dropped. "Yeah, I'm safe. Some woman let me in." He glanced at me and forced a smile. "No, she's nice. Don't worry." Then he hung up and sighed. "They'll be here soon." I made him tea. That's what you do when you've spent a lifetime fixing problems that aren't yours to fix. He thanked me, both hands cupping the mug as if he hadn't felt warmth in days. After a while I asked, "Where were you headed?" He hesitated. "Nowhere in particular." It wasn't an answer, but I didn't push. You learn not to when you've spent decades with a man who never told you what he was really thinking. The rain got heavier, and the road outside blurred into silver. "You can wait inside until your ride comes," I said. His eyes lifted to mine. There was gratitude there, but also something else, something watchful. "Thank you," he said. They never came. 2 hours passed, and the storm worsened. By then it was nearly dark, and the road had flooded halfway to the bend. "No one's coming tonight," I said. "You can stay in the guest room." He started to protest, but his voice faltered. "I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble. I could use the company." The words slipped out before I could stop them. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the creak of the floorboards upstairs, the faint sound of water dripping from his shoes left by the back door. Around midnight I went up to check. The guest room door was closed, the light off. But under the crack, I saw the faint glow of his phone screen. I told myself not to worry. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft sound. Not the murmur of a voice, but something sharper. Like the click of a camera shutter. By morning, the storm had passed. Evan came down early, hair damp, clothes cleaner than they'd been the day before. "Morning," he said, smiling. It was the first time I noticed how charming his smile could be. The kind that could make you forget to guard yourself. He offered to fix the fence that had been knocked down by the storm. "You don't have to." "I like fixing things," he interrupted gently. So I let him. He worked quietly, skillfully, like someone who'd done manual labor before. By noon, the fence looked better than it had in years. When I brought him lemonade, he grinned. "Guess you're stuck with me until I get my car back." Something about that phrasing, "stuck with me," lodged in my mind like a splinter. He stayed for 3 days. By then, it didn't even feel strange. I told myself it was fine. He was helping around the house, doing things Harold had always promised to fix but never did. But on the 4th night, I woke to find the hallway light on. The guest room door was open, and Evan was standing in my living room, staring at the family photos on the mantel. When he noticed me, he smiled. "You look like him," he said. "Who?" He pointed to the picture of Harold. "Your husband." I hesitated. "He passed away." "I know," he said quietly. The air froze between us. "How would you know that?" He blinked slowly. "You told me." But I hadn't. I was sure I hadn't. The next morning, his car was gone from the mechanic's lot, but he was still in my kitchen making coffee. "You could have gone home," I said. He smiled. "This feels more like home." That was the first time I felt afraid. Not of him, not yet, but of myself. Because part of me didn't want him to leave. There's a strange comfort in routine, in making breakfast for two, in hearing another set of footsteps in the house. For years, my mornings were just the clatter of one coffee cup and the hollow hum of silence. Now there was laughter in the kitchen, someone reaching for the jam before I did, a plate being washed before I even asked. I told myself I was helping him, that letting Evan stay a little longer was only fair, since the storm had damaged his car beyond easy repair. But sometimes I caught myself humming again, something I hadn't done since before Harold's funeral. That frightened me. Because joy in my world always seemed to demand repayment. By the second week, Evan had made himself indispensable. He repaired the loose tiles on the porch, cleared the basement, and even managed to fix the old generator Harold could never figure out. "You're quite the handyman," I told him one afternoon. He grinned, eyes glinting beneath the sunlight. "Guess I just like keeping busy." "Where'd you learn all that?" I shrugged. "Here and there." It wasn't much of an answer, but I was too polite or too lonely to dig deeper. That evening I was dusting the bookshelf when I found something that didn't belong, a photograph lying behind one of Harold's old novels. It was a picture of Harold and me at the lake, the summer before he passed. But someone had marked the back of it in pen. "She doesn't know." I stared at it for a long time, my throat tightening. Who wrote that? Evan wasn't home at the time, or at least I thought he wasn't. But the moment I heard the front door creak, I slid the photo under a pile of mail and smiled as he walked in. "Long day?" "Yes." "Yeah," he said. "I went into town, tried calling the insurance again. They're still dragging their feet." "Did you get through to anyone?" He paused just long enough for me to notice. "Not really." Something about his tone, too casual, too smooth, didn't sit right. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the last months before Harold died, the quiet arguments, the half-truths, the way he started locking the study door at night. And I wondered why that phrase, "she doesn't know," felt like it belonged to him, not Evan. The next morning I went looking for the photo. It was gone. I searched everywhere. Under the pile of mail, behind the books, even the trash bin. Nothing. When Evan came in for breakfast, I studied him closely. "You were up early," I said lightly. "Couldn't sleep." He reached for the toast, smiled, and said, "You have a beautiful home." Something about the way he said "you" made me feel like the house wasn't mine anymore. By the third week, I knew he was lying to me. Not in the obvious ways, not about his car or his calls, but in smaller, quieter things. He once mentioned growing up in Portland, but later talked about spending his childhood near Denver. He said he'd been an only child, but I overheard him muttering a woman's name, Claire, in his sleep, followed by "I'm sorry." And then there was the night I found him in Harold's study. He claimed he was looking for a flashlight, but the desk drawers were open, papers scattered. "What were you looking for?" I asked. "Just curious," he said, smiling that same disarming smile. I tried to believe him. But the next morning, I found Harold's old wristwatch on Evan's wrist. It's funny how fear doesn't always come in a single burst. Sometimes it arrives gradually, like fog seeping under a door, until you can't see what's real anymore. I told myself I'd ask him to leave. I rehearsed the words a dozen times. But when I saw him sitting on the porch that evening, staring into the distance with that lonely, broken look, my resolve softened again. "You remind me of my son," I said quietly. He turned to me slowly. You never told me you had one. I don't, I whispered. I didn't. We lost him years ago. Car accident. Evan's expression softened. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was long, heavy, the kind that tugs at your heart until you feel exposed. Then he said, You know, sometimes I feel like I was supposed to meet you. I should have felt flattered. Instead, I felt the room tilt just slightly. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of the back door opening. When I looked outside, I saw Evan standing in the yard, barefoot, his phone's flashlight sweeping over the flower bed near the fence. I stayed in the shadows, watching. He was digging. Not deep. Just enough to unearth something small, metallic. He wiped it with his sleeve, looked around, and then slipped it into his pocket. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The next morning, there was a fresh patch of soil beside the roses, and Evan was gone. His backpack, his shoes, everything. For the first time in weeks, the house felt empty again. Relief and fear tangled inside me. And then, just as I was beginning to breathe again, I saw it. Lying on the kitchen counter, wrapped in a folded note. Harold's missing wedding ring. The note said only 4 words. He told me everything. The house felt colder after Evan disappeared, like the warmth he'd brought had only been borrowed. I walked from room to room, waiting for the quiet to settle, but it didn't. Pressed in instead, thick, accusatory. Harold's ring glinted under the morning light, sitting on the kitchen counter like an open wound. I hadn't seen it since the night of his accident. The police never found it, though they searched the wreck and the ditch where his car had rolled. Now here it was, wrapped in a note from a man I'd known barely 3 weeks. I didn't want to believe the words. He told me everything. Everything about what? I spent the rest of that day pacing the house, the note in my pocket, the ring burning my palm whenever I held it. I called the number Evan had given me when he first arrived. Disconnected. I called the repair shop he claimed to have used. No record of him. By late afternoon, my hands trembled as I dialed the local police. This is Margaret Hayes, I said. There's been a strange incident. The woman on the other end sounded bored until I mentioned Evan's name. Evan Matthews, she repeated. Yes, was. Then, ma'am, could you hold for a moment? I waited, heart thudding in my chest. When she came back, her tone had changed. Tighter, more careful. Mrs. Hayes, I think you should come down to the station. The drive there was a blur. My mind flickered between the past and present. Harold's laughter, the quiet nights before the crash, the way he used to stroke my hair and promise we'd grow old together. At the station, a detective named Sergeant Laird met me in a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Mrs. Hayes, he said, extending a hand. You mentioned Evan Matthews. Yes. He's been staying at my home for the past 3 weeks. He exchanged a glance with another officer. And you said he left a note. I nodded, handing it over with the ring. He studied them silently, then sighed. Mrs. Hayes, I think you'd better sit down. They led me into a small interview room, the kind with walls that seemed too close. Evan Matthews, Laird began, was reported missing 3 months ago by his sister, Claire Matthews. The name chilled me. I remembered Evan mumbling Claire in his sleep. He was last seen near the state highway, not far from where your husband's accident occurred. I blinked. That can't be right. Laird nodded grimly. It gets stranger. The car he was driving that night, it belonged to a Harold Hayes. I felt my stomach drop. That's my husband, I whispered. Laird leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, are you saying you didn't know your husband had any contact with Evan Matthews before the accident? I didn't, I said, my voice cracking. Harold never mentioned him. Then you might want to look at this. He slid a file across the table. Inside was a photo of Harold and Evan standing outside a cafe, laughing, their arms slung around each other like old friends. The timestamp was 2 weeks before Harold's crash. By the time I drove home, rain streaked the windshield in silver ribbons. The house looked different now. The rooms I'd once thought of as safe felt watchful, full of things I hadn't seen clearly before. I poured a glass of wine, then another, until the clock read past midnight. I tried to piece it all together. Harold had known Evan. Evan had vanished. And somehow Harold's ring, the same one I thought lost in the wreck, ended up back in my kitchen years later. What had Harold told him? Sleep never came easy that night. At some point, I must have drifted off on the couch, because I woke to the sound of the back door creaking open. Every nerve in my body went rigid. I sat up slowly. The lights were off, but a faint shadow moved past the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered. "Evan," I whispered. No reply. I reached for the lamp. The bulb flickered, then steadied. The house was empty. But there was something on the coffee table. A Polaroid photograph, still fresh, the film not fully developed. When the image came into focus, I nearly dropped it. It was me, standing by the window, taken from outside the house. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, "You should have told the truth." For the next few days, I lived in a fog. Every knock, every creak in the floorboards made my pulse race. I called the police again, but without evidence of a break-in, they couldn't do much. Sergeant Laird promised to send a patrol car by every few nights. But by the fourth evening, when I caught sight of a figure near the fence, a man maybe, or a trick of the light, I realized the police couldn't protect me from what was already inside my head. I began searching through Harold's study. Old letters, notebooks, scraps of paper. Anything that could explain what was happening. And then I found it. A USB drive taped underneath his desk. I plugged it into my laptop, heart hammering. There were only 2 files. Both video. The first showed Harold, sitting at his desk, looking older and more worn than I remembered. "Margaret," he began, voice shaking. "If you're seeing this," then I didn't get the chance to explain. He took a breath. "Evan Matthews isn't who he says he is. He's the son of Daniel Matthews, the man I..." He stopped, rubbing his face. "Years ago I made a mistake. A business deal gone wrong. Daniel took the fall for something I did. He lost everything, his company, his life. And now, his son wants to make me pay." Harold's eyes lifted to the camera, full of regret. "I tried to make it right. But I think he's already found me." The video ended there. The second file was empty. I sat in the dark for hours, shaking, until dawn broke pale and blue over the horizon. Evan hadn't come to me by accident. He'd come because of Harold. Because of something that had happened long before I ever opened my door. But there was one more thing I couldn't understand. If Evan blamed Harold, why had he turned his attention to me? Unless I was the one Harold had confessed to. Unless I knew more than I remembered. When dawn arrived, I was still sitting in Harold's study. The air felt stale, thick with years of dust and unspoken things. I'd played the video so many times that Harold's voice no longer sounded like him. Just a weary echo trapped inside my laptop. I didn't move for hours. Every part of me was trembling, not just from fear but from something deeper. The slow, gnawing realization that I'd lived inside a carefully curated silence. And maybe it helped build it. I tried to remember that business deal Harold had mentioned, the one that destroyed Daniel Matthews. He never spoke much about work. I wasn't interested, and he was happy to keep it that way. But I remembered the tension around that time. The phone calls he'd take outside, the arguments with his partner, the nights he came home smelling of whiskey instead of cologne. He told me it was stress, the market, the clients. Now, sitting in that same study surrounded by documents I'd never read, I wondered if the truth had been here all along, buried under my own refusal to look. I opened the desk drawers again and began sorting through every folder. Most were dull. Invoices, contracts, meeting notes. But then I found a brown envelope sealed with tape. On the front, Harold had scrawled, "For Margaret, if anything happens." Inside was a letter. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I've failed to fix what I broke. Daniel trusted me, and I used him. When the authorities came asking about the embezzlement, I let them believe it was him. He went to prison for 3 years. His wife couldn't bear it. She took her life while he was still inside. I tried to confess later, but he wouldn't listen. He said he'd make sure I lost everything I loved just like he did. I think Evan found out. He came to see me, Maggie. He wasn't angry, just broken. Said he didn't want revenge. Said he wanted me to understand what it felt like to live with a ghost. I told him about us, about how you were the only thing that still made sense. Maybe that was my mistake. If anything happens to me, protect yourself. Don't let him in, asterisk. I dropped the letter. Don't let him in. The words pulsed in my skull like a heartbeat. I thought back to that night in the storm. The rain, the car on the roadside, the shivering man asking for help. I had let him in. The next few days blurred together. Barely ate. Barely slept. I caught myself talking to Harold out loud, as if he could still explain what none of this meant. Every noise in the house felt loaded. Every flicker of light felt intentional. One morning I found muddy footprints in the hallway, faint like they'd been half wiped away. I followed them to the back door, which was slightly ajar. The police had stopped their patrols by then. There's no evidence of trespassing, Mrs. Hayes, Sergeant Laird had said. Probably just neighborhood kids. But I knew better. Someone had been inside. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The street outside was quiet, too quiet. And then, at precisely 9 o'clock, the phone rang. Mrs. Hayes. The voice was soft, male, familiar. Froze. Evan. Oz. You found it, didn't you? The letter. My throat went dry. What do you want from me? To finish the story. You've done enough, I whispered. Not yet, he said. Harold wasn't the only one who lied. And then the line went dead. That night, I dreamt of Harold's accident. The crash, the twisted metal, the smell of gasoline. But this time it was different. I was there. Not beside him but watching. Standing by the roadside, holding his phone. He called my name and I turned away. When I woke, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Was that just a dream? Or something I'd forgotten? The next morning I went to the crash site, the same road where Harold had died. It was only a 15-minute drive, though I hadn't been back since the funeral. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine. The guardrail was still bent, rusted at the edges. I parked, stepped out and stood in the silence. Felt familiar. Too familiar. Something inside me loosened. A memory uncoiling, slow and cruel. The argument. The rain. The words I said. Sharp enough to slice through anything tender. You think you can fix everything by feeling sorry? Shouted. You're not a good man, Harold. You're a coward. He'd gotten into the car, hands trembling. I'd walked away before he even started the engine. And then, the crash. I'd never told anyone that part. The guilt had buried itself so deep. I'd mistaken it for grief. By the time I returned home, dusk had fallen. The house seemed darker than usual. Or maybe it was just my eyes adjusting to the truth. On the kitchen counter there was a new envelope. No name. No stamp. Inside, another photograph. This one showed me standing beside my car at the crash site, taken just hours ago. And scrawled across the bottom in red ink. Now you remember. I dropped the photo, backing away so fast I hit the counter. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. I looked around, heart pounding. The back door was still locked. The curtains drawn. But I could feel it, someone had been here. My gaze caught on the hallway mirror. And for a brief, impossible second, I thought I saw a reflection behind me. A figure at the edge of the glass, half-lit, watching. When I turned, the hallway was empty. That night, I barricaded the doors and sat with Harold's letter in my lap. If Evan wanted me to remember, then maybe that was the punishment. Not death but truth. I had believed I was the good one. Kind one. The woman who offered a stranger warmth on a rainy night. But kindness isn't always mercy. Sometimes it's just guilt wearing a friendly face. The phone rang again around midnight. I didn't answer. When the message tone beeped, I forced myself to play it. Evan's voice, quiet, steady. You were there, Margaret. You watched him die. You could have saved him. Static filled the line, then silence. And then a final whisper, almost gentle. I think you finally understand what it feels like to live with a ghost. Morning came without sunlight. A heavy fog pressed against the windows, muting the world beyond the glass. I sat in Harold's old armchair, the phone still in my hand, replaying Evan's message until the words no longer made sense. You were there, Margaret. You watched him die. It echoed through the house like a curse. And the terrible thing was, part of me believed it. Because the dream wasn't fading anymore. It was becoming clearer. I don't know what I expected to find when I went back to Harold's study that morning. Answers, maybe, or the courage to finally stop pretending. But all I found was dust and silence. Still, I sat there and opened my laptop again. The second file on Harold's USB drive, the one that had been blank before, now had data. My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. Video began. Grainy, flickering, recorded from the same angle as the first. This time it wasn't Harold. It was Evan. He sat in the study, in my study, the one I was sitting in now. I told you I'd finish the story, he said quietly. His face looked pale, exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Harold didn't die because of me. Or because of the accident. He died because of you. He leaned closer to the camera. You left him that night, Margaret. You were supposed to pick him up after he called you, remember? But you didn't. You turned off your phone. I felt something snap in my chest. You blamed him for everything. For Daniel. For the lies. You wanted to punish him. And you did. The only difference is you forgot it because that's what guilt does. It rewrites memory until you can live with yourself. He paused, staring into the lens. I didn't come here to hurt you. Came to remind you. You told Harold once that truth heals everything. I thought maybe that was true. I thought maybe if I made you remember, I could finally let my father rest. He stood up, his expression hollow. You let Harold die, Margaret. Now you can live with what's left. The video ended abruptly. For a long time I just sat there. My breathing was shallow, uneven. It wasn't that I didn't believe him, it was that I did. Fragments began to surface. Memories I'd buried under years of denial. The night Harold called me. The rain pounding on the windshield. The way I looked at the phone, saw his name and pressed decline. 'Cause I was angry. Because I wanted him to suffer the way I had when I found out about his betrayal. He'd left me to clean up his lies, to bear the shame alone. And in that moment I thought, let him deal with it himself. By the time I called back it was too late. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when I opened my eyes again it was dark. The house was completely still. And then I heard it. A step. Low. Careful. Coming from the hallway. Evan. My voice trembled. No reply. I stood, gripping the edge of the desk. My heart thudded against my ribs. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then came a whisper, not from the hall, but from behind me. You remember now. I spun around. The room was empty. But the smell of rain filled the air, damp and cold, just like that night years ago. And in the reflection of the window, for the briefest second, I saw him. Not Evan. Not Harold. Both. Standing together. Watching. I woke up on the floor the next morning. The fog had lifted. Sunlight creeping through the curtains. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The video file was gone. The USB drive too. I told myself it didn't matter. Because I finally knew the truth. It wasn't about Evan anymore. It wasn't even about Harold. It was about me. And the story I'd built to survive my own cruelty. Maybe that's what guilt does best. It gives you villains to chase, so you never have to see yourself clearly. The police came one last time. Sergeant Laird stood at the door. His expression weary. Mrs. Hayes, he said, we've concluded the investigation. There's no record of an Evan Matthews staying at your address. No fingerprints, no identification. Are you sure about his name? I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a sob. Yes, I whispered. I'm sure. He nodded, not pressing further. We'll close the case then. You take care of yourself. When he left, the silence returned. Not cruel this time, just final. Weeks passed. The neighbors whispered. I stopped answering calls. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a man across the street, tall, still watching. Other times I'd smell rain when the sky was perfectly dry. I stopped trying to decide what was real. One evening, I walked down to the lake where Harold used to fish. The water was still, reflecting the fading light like glass. I sat on the bench, clutching his ring, the one Evan had returned, and slipped it onto my finger. I'm sorry, I whispered. For everything. A breeze moved across the surface of the lake, gentle, almost forgiving. And for the first time in years I felt something close to peace. Not absolution but acceptance. I had let a stranger in, thinking I was offering kindness. But really I just opened the door to the truth. And the truth, once it enters, never leaves. Months later, the house went up for sale. The new owner said it felt oddly lived in, though everything had been cleaned and repainted. One evening, while unpacking, the wife found a small USB drive taped under the study desk. 2 files. The first, Harold's confession. The second, a new video, dated only a week before the house sold. It showed Margaret Hayes sitting by the lake, smiling faintly at the camera. I forgave him, she said softly. And I forgave myself. But forgiveness doesn't erase ghosts. It just teaches you how to live with them. Then she looked directly into the lens. Be careful who you let in. The video cut to black. Click the subscribe button.